and we have a really great presentation today. Infrastructure has been on everyone's mind and has been one of the hottest topics in government and news for quite some time. And this past year, numerous programs have provided additional funding for infrastructure, a variety of types of infrastructure. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act being one. And today, to talk to us about opportunities this has created at the state level are Nicole Moore, Sarah Okerlund, and Mary Beth Sprouse from the Iowa Department of Transportation. Nicole, I will turn it over to you now. And thanks for being here. Just a quick note for everybody. Please do stay muted unless you're asking a question. And if you do have a question, you can feel free to raise your virtual hand or enter it into the chat, and we will call on you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Working on sharing my screen here, make sure that it works. Okay, can you guys see the first slide there that says funding for local public agencies? Okay, I see a thumbs up from Robert, thank you. All right. So we are going to talk about a multitude of information today that we think that the cities will be interested in, one of which is the infrastructure bill, like Robert mentioned. So a little bit about local systems culture. We have a service mentality. We serve and collaborate with all 942 cities that we have in the state. We have 99 counties in which we collaborate with, and numerous consultants that work in the civil engineering type of field. We also act as a spokesperson with Iowa cities and counties, kind of the be their voice mentality when we collaborate with people and then work around the DOT with others and kind of say what the city and county thoughts on a particular issue might be. It's a great opportunity to build positive relationships with cities, counties, and other partners. And we play a beneficial role, at least we like to think so. And there's our mission statement there at the bottom, to work with our transportation partners and provide guidance in the development and implementation of projects to ensure compliance with state and federal requirements. Together we can and we will continue to improve the quality of transportation in Iowa. And here are some of our local systems contacts on the city side of things. We've got Mary Beth Sprouse, our reporting specialist. Jennifer Bates is our urban engineer, and she just started a couple weeks ago at the DOT, so we're very excited to have her on board. We have Sarah Okerlund, our deputy director, and myself, Nicole Moore, the director of the Local Systems Bureau. So we have quite a few resources on our website. You can just Google Iowa DOT local systems and that will get you there. One of our main features is the Contact Us webpage, where we have our organization chart and our regions map, which I'll show you. And then here's a screenshot. And if you scroll down on that page, you can see what all of our job duties are in the Local Systems Bureau. And several of us have pictures shown there as well. So here's our organization chart. You can see we have several folks that do a variety of different duties, and I won't get into everything, but just know that you can find that on our website. And then we have our regional field staff. It's overlaid on the DOT district map. So the black, mostly vertical lines depict the different breaks in the regions, the west, the central, and the eastern regions. And then the purple line that kind of runs mostly horizontally across the state is our technician boundary line, where they kind of focus on the north half or the south half of their region. And we have contact information for our region field engineers on that slide as well. So I'll get into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, that is also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill. Mainly, I'll focus on a couple different programs, the STBG, Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, and the new Bridge Formula Program. So first, just a little bit of history about the federal transportation bills. They also get referred to as Surface Transportation Reauthorization at times. So since we refer to them as so many things, it can often be confusing. So first, we have the most recent one that passed back in November, and that is the IIJA, or bill as it's now being called. Previous to that, we had several bills with different dates on there that you can see. We've also had numerous stakeholder meetings. Every single time there's a new bill, we meet with the cities and counties and the regional planning affiliations and the metropolitan planning organizations to discuss, what is different from the previous bill, how we might want to fund different programs, and various other things. Each bill has had more funding than the previous bill. So I just wanted to point that out. Here is kind of the chart of all of the different programs, all of what they call core programs that are within that bill. And you can see the 2021 column there towards the left. And then the 2022 through 2026, which is the life of the IIJA bill. And you can see that those numbers mostly go up in most of the different programs. There's a couple programs that remain fairly static, like Rail Highway Crossing Program, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, the National Highway Freight Program. Those don't go up by a whole lot, but the other ones do. You can see down at the bottom, there's some blank spaces for Bridge, Carbon Reduction, and Protect under 2021. That is because those are new programs. So if you look right above those programs, you see Highway Infra / Bridge. That was some extra bridge money that we were getting in 2019, 20, and 21. That when we received that money, we did share some of that with the locals. So we had many discussions about that as well. And then that is kind of replaced by this new Bridge Formula Program. So you see that dollar amount essentially doubled for Iowa between 2021's Highway Infra and Bridge and 2022's Bridge Program. Here is a chart that shows all of the different dollar amounts. It just kind of shows that other information from the previous slide in a little bit different way. And it shows all those different programs, and then it shows a little bit more detail on how some of that gets split out. I won't get into a lot of details on this slide, but I just wanted to share it with you so you could kind of see that there are different ways of apportioning the money, and that is all based on what the federal transportation bill says. So current federal funding programs for LPAs include the STBG, the Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. And within that program, there are numerous, I'll call them sub-programs, State Planning and Research, TAP, which is Transportation Alternatives Program, Flexible TAP, which is also Transportation Alternatives Program. It just, the funding is flexible, where you don't have to spend it on transportation alternatives type projects necessarily, but you can. The Federal Recreational Trails Program, the funding that gets apportioned to the TMAs, the MPOs, and the RPAs within the state of Iowa. And then in the past, STBG has included a set aside of bridge funding. We'll get into that in more detail here in a little bit. Other programs on the right side of this chart include the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, the Rail Highway Crossing Program, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, which you might be familiar with the ICAP program, Iowa's Clean Air Attainment Program. That is essentially the way that Iowa runs our portion of the CMAQ program at the federal level. So we kind of changed the name. The Metropolitan Planning funding, National Highway Freight funding, a little bit of that goes to the locals. And then I mentioned that bridge replacement and rehab from 2021 that also had a portion go to the locals. So with most of the federal bills that we've had over several years, there has been a split between the DOT and the locals of about 2/3 of the federal funding going to the DOT and about 1/3 going to the LPA programs. So we're kind of planning to maintain that 1/3 portion to the LPA programs. So if we have higher levels of STBG funding, then the Bridge Formula Program funding would be funded at a lower level to maintain that 1/3. And then if we had higher levels of the Bridge Formula Program funding going to the locals, then that would include a lower level of STBG funding. So we'll get into bridge funding, kind of the past history there. The chart on the left shows the City Bridge Program history. So you can see in 2011, the total allocation to city bridges was about 7.6 million. And then that about doubled up to 2021 of over $15 million to that City Bridge Program. The left side is showing the County Bridge Program. So 32 million in 2011, and then about 49 million in 2021. So you can see that history over the last 10 years that we've had a great increase in bridge funding. And so that's something that I think the locals have appreciated and been able to utilize. So for the Bridge Formula Program, the eligible uses include highway bridge replacements, rehabilitation, preservation, protection, or new construction. I believe that former bills have not included new construction very much in their bridge funding. So that's a nice change to add. The way that the funding was distributed to all of the different states included 75% by state share of the total cost to replace the poor bridges. So we have bridge condition ratings of good, fair, and poor. And poor is, of course, the worst. And then the rest of the funding was based on 25% of the state's share of the total cost to rehab the fair bridges. So each state was guaranteed 45 million as a minimum. And then Iowa is getting 86 million. One thing about the bill that is good for the locals is that there is an off-system bridge set aside. So essentially what off-system means is that it's on a local road or a minor collector, and it is off of what they call the federal aid system, which is major collectors or collectors in cities and above higher classifications of roadways, so like arterials and things like that. So there's an off-system bridge set aside of about $13 million out of that Bridge Formula Program. And here is a big change from the previous bills. Off-system bridges shall be funded at 100% federal share if they are owned by the LPA. So it's always been an 80% funding rate, and then 20% had to be funded by local funds that were from the LPAs, the cities or counties. So it's really nice that we have this flexibility in the bill. I think that'll really help, particularly a lot of the smaller cities. And for those of you that are familiar with the SWAP program, that's what that last bullet is referring to. 15% off-system bridge set aside cannot be swapped. So that's not really something I'll get into today, but just know that those bridges will have to be federal aid. The STBG program also has an off-system bridge set aside. So that's 12.4 million plus the 13 million out of the bridge formula program is a total of $25 million in off-system bridge set aside. So that's a really good set aside of funding for the locals to utilize. I went and I looked back to see what we had let for off-system bridges under past funding, because I thought that sounded like a high number, and I was hoping that we had enough bridges that needed replaced in order to spend that level of funding. As it turns out, we do have that level of bridges that need funding. So almost 44 million in 2019 of off-system bridges were let, and then almost 39 million in 2020 were let at the DOT. So I think it's safe to say that we do have that kind of need in Iowa, and that funding will be well utilized. We also looked at the bridge condition trends just to kind of see how each entity was doing between DOT, cities as a whole, and counties as a whole. And you can see, so this is the deck area of poor bridges. So the state deck area was going down from 2018 to 2020, and then it jumped up a little bit in 2021. The city poor bridge deck area is going down, so that's good to see. And then the counties are remaining fairly steady. The counties are shown there in green, and the counties own quite a few, just simply number of bridges because they have such a vast system. So this chart on the left shows just the number of all bridges. So we didn't put a condition rating on it, just all the bridges that are owned by each agency type. So the state bridges are shown there in red, the city bridges are in yellow, and the county bridges are in green. And so the number doesn't change much from year to year. You can see that the number of city bridges has gone up a little bit in the past couple of years, and we assume that that's due to annexations. And the flip side of that is that the number of county bridges have gone down. Again, we assume that it's because the city has acquired ownership of a couple of county bridges. So, and then the state bridges remains fairly steady. And then the chart on the right is the number of poor bridges per agency type. So you can see they're all going down, but it's at a fairly steady rate. So here's kind of a summary of that bridge data. The DOT has made progress on the poor bridges over the years. We've had a 20% reduction in the number of poor bridges, but we've actually had a 3% increase in the square footage of poor bridges. And I think that's probably just because there's a low number of poor bridges on the DOT system. And so if one smaller bridge gets replaced and is no longer in poor condition, and then another bridge gets inspected and is put in poor condition instead of fair, like maybe it used to be, and if that bridge is a little bit larger, that causes an increase in that square footage of poor bridges. Steady progress has been made on county and city bridges, but inspections are required on bridges every 2 years. And so the net result has kind of been improvement, but it's not been a large amount of improvement. It's been fairly minimal. The cities have successfully reduced the number of poor bridges and the square footage of poor bridges over the years. The counties saw a 4% reduction in number of poor bridges, but a 3% increase in square footage of poor bridges over the years. So now we'll get into the STBG, or Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. that requires that program at the federal level requires a 2% set aside for the state planning and research fund. And then it also requires a set aside of about 10% of transportation alternatives program funding. So then it requires a 55% set aside to go to areas based on population. And there's various population subcategories. And that's where in Iowa, we provide that funding to the TMAs, the MPOs, and the RPAs. And that's how that gets split amongst those areas of population. The remaining 45%, after we've taken those two off the tops, can go to any area in the state. That is where the previous bridge funding has come from. And I'll show you a flow chart here in just a minute that kind of will hopefully help put all those words in perspective. So here's the 2021 funding. And these are the final allocations. So usually we get kind of draft or target allocations, and then at the end of the year, we know what those final allocations are. So the second box there is the state planning and research funding that I mentioned, that 2%. I'm gonna try and use the laser pointer in here. All right, do you see the little red dot on the screen there? That should hopefully be helpful. The next is that transportation alternatives program set aside. That was previously 7%. So you see that that $10.7 million number is not 10% of that $156 million number. And that's because this dollar amount was 7%. So that did go up to 10% in the IIJA bill. So then if you come down here to this number, we've taken a few items off up here. And then you go to the left here, that's the 55% to areas based on population. And here's the 45% based on any area of the state, or it can go to any area of the state. And then I'll go to the next slide, which kind of repeats all of these. And after conversations with our stakeholders at the FAST Act meeting in 2016, this is how we determined that we would split out those funds. So STBG, 92%, and then 8% went to locals, or I'm sorry, went to the DOT. And then out of this $56 million number is where we came up with the bridge allocation. And there's the city bridge program and the county bridge program dollar amount. And then if you follow this number to the left, part of that, about 19%, goes back into the STBG local distribution side. And so it flows over here. And then that is how it goes to the TMAs, the MPOs, and the RPAs. So then if you look at the different dollar amounts that we have available, we call this kind of the status quo. So it's splitting out the funding in the same manner. And this is as a proposal or just one way that we could split out this funding to the RPAs, MPOs, and TMAs, and then the other side, the right side here of that any area funding. So here you can see the numbers have gone up significantly, and that's because this top dollar amount is higher. So this is, we wanted to show this chart to our stakeholders last week. We had a meeting last week with our small group of stakeholders that are helping us to determine where this funding should go for the locals. And so we presented this chart to them. Over on the right side here, if we utilize the STBG flow chart as shown on the left, then to maintain that 1/3, 2/3 split between the LPAs and the DOT, there would be almost 45 million in bridge funding for the locals from this bridge formula program as well. So that could include up to 95 million for bridges out of STBG, this 50 million, and the bridge formula program, or BFP as we have it labeled on here. And so these are the discussions that we're having, you know, does the bridge program need to be this big, or would it make sense if this number here got smaller and this number here got larger? And so those are the decisions that we're looking at with this larger group. And then you can see the dollar amounts here. That's just the bottom half of this flow chart. This number has been repeated from the previous slide. And so that would mean that almost 21 million would go to the TMAs, 19 million would go to the MPOs, and 50 million would go to the RPAs. So we've been having some discussions about the funding level for the bridge set aside relative to the STBG funds distributed by population. Would we keep the rate of increase the same for the STBG and the bridge funding? Or would we increase STBG faster than we increase bridge? Or would we increase the bridge funding faster than we increase the STBG that flows through the RPAs, MPOs, and TMAs? And I think it's become clear that the cities and counties would like to grow the bridge program. Just how much is what we are still working through right now. And for our next meeting, we will run some scenarios to look at some of the different ways that we could fund bridges at a higher level than what we have previously been. Overall, there's about a 25% to 30% increase in the funding for the highway type programs. One of the challenges is that the primary road funds that we've been funding the federal aid swap from, they're insufficient to match the additional federal funding that the DOT is getting, as well as fund the swap program. So we've kind of transitioned into some federal aid and some swap, but now we're going to have to transition back to a lot more federal aid for the locals. So the number looks like only about $50 million will be able to be swapped. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Currently, we swap basically the entire STBG pot of funding. So that 2021 flow chart that you saw, essentially all of that was swapped, and then the DOT was utilizing the STBG funding. The city and county bridge programs have been swapped for about the past 3.5 years. The highway safety improvement program for the counties has been swapped. Some of the ICAP, or Iowa's Clean Air Attainment Program, have been swapped. And the new bridge formula program, we may be able to swap some of that and we may not. So those are the ongoing conversations that we are having with our stakeholder group. Our next steps are to have continued stakeholder input and Iowa DOT Commission input and approval. So that's the next steps we're looking at with the IIJA. Before we transition, it looks like there are a few people with their hands raised, and there's some questions in the chat pod. Let me look through the chat pod here real quick.
Some of the chat pod questions we may address in the next future slides.
Okay.
So
okay,
some of them.
Yeah. I have them listed at, in a Word document too, if you need me to read them. But one of the questions, Dawn had her hand raised if she wants to ask her question. It's one that I have on the list.
Yeah, go ahead, Dawn.
Her question was if there would still be the $1 million cap.
So that is, we are currently discussing that with APWA. So that's the American Public Works Association. And we're looking at whether that cap should be raised, whether it makes sense to raise that cap. So if you have thoughts on that, we would love to hear them. Is that $1 million not enough anymore? I think for some bridges it might be, and others, you know, it might not be. So we definitely would be interested in hearing from you folks on your thoughts on that.
Hi, sorry, I was having a problem with unmute. This is Dawn, I'm the one that asked that question. I think the $1 million works really well on bridges that don't have sidewalks.
Okay.
But on bridges that are also trying to incorporate sidewalks, we at least have run into that not being enough or really, really pushing that limit.
Okay.
And with just the cost increases we've seen in the last few years, I think it's going to be even harder to meet that $1 million.
Okay. Great. Thank you for your input. We'll write that down and make sure to share that with APWA when we start having those conversations.
Thank you.
I see that somebody asked a question about a rail bridge. That's a great question. So the question was that a city owns a rail bridge, and would the bridge allocations be available for a rail bridge or vehicular only? I think we have to look into that. I believe we might have some guidance in one of our IMs, IM 1.100. Do you have that pulled up by chance, Sarah?
I don't have it
okay.
pulled up, but I do know. I'll move closer over to the mic. I'm Sarah Okerlund. Hello, everyone. I do know with our existing city bridge program, those railroad owned bridges are eligible if the city wanted to submit them to be added to the candidate list for consideration. A couple of caveats, and the details are in that IM 1.100. A couple caveats are at the end of construction, the city would have to take over ownership of that bridge. And then it will also need to have those inspections so we know the actual condition of the bridge. Some of the rail-owned bridges are, they have different guidelines for some of that stuff. And I don't know all of the nitty-gritty on that, but we can look into it if it's something your community is interested in. So it would not replace actual railroad bridges if you have an underpass. That's more for the street crossings, like the street bridges, if that makes sense.
Carries vehicular traffic over a railroad.
Yes.
Okay.
Good clarification.
Cool. I see you're the one that asked the question and you've got your hand up. Do you have additional information you'd like to add?
Okay, so what this is a rail bridge across the Mississippi. It was constructed in 1916, 19 something or other, right? It used to have vehicular traffic until the 80s, and then they constructed a new bridge across the river here. We still own and operate the rail portion of the bridge. So that's why I'm asking if bridge funds would be available to help us begin to fix this bridge, because there are parts on there that have not been fixed in decades that need attention.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that's a specific enough situation that we would probably have to look into that and read through the bill and and see if our guidance would allow for something like that.
Right. And I don't believe our existing guidance for our city bridge program I believe it has to carry vehicular traffic. So
Okay.
that is a condition of the current city bridge program. But like
Okay.
Nicole said, whether it's other things that are in the bill, we don't really know those nitty gritty details. So
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
And some things that we didn't get into with this presentation, partially because we don't know a lot of information about them yet, are the discretionary grant programs. I had received a document about a week ago, I think, and it had a few pieces of information listed about these discretionary grant programs. So that would involve locals applying on their own for these grants. And so what I need to still do is look and see if there are websites out there that have some information. And then we would send one of our local systems emails out to our large group of people who have signed up for that list. And we do have a slide later in the presentation that shows you how to sign up for that list if you're not already on it. So once we learn a little bit more about these discretionary grants, we'll be able to share that information with you folks. I'm going through the questions in the chat pod.
LPA maybe?
Yeah, there's a question in there. Remind what LAP is. I don't know if that meant LPA, but LPA would be a local public agency, mainly just our cities and counties. Some states have villages and towns and cities, so they would all qualify as LPAs, but that's kind of the term that we use. What determines if it is off system? And the 100% for these means federal money will pay 100% of replacement, and that's a question. So what determines if it is off system is its kind of classification of the roadway. So the federal aid classification system for roadways includes things like principal arterials, minor arterials, major collectors or collectors in cities, and minor collectors and local roads. So essentially minor collectors and local roads are what are considered to be off system. And then the 100% federal money means it will pay for 100% of replacement. Yes, with a certain caveat that if the bridge program for cities still would have a limit of say $1 million, or maybe that limit gets raised, then it would pay for 100% of funding up to that limit. And the reason that we put in those limits is so that maybe we can get more bridges replaced. So that's kind of the history behind the reasons that we do that sort of thing. Does rail highway crossings apply to areas within city limits on city streets? It does. So basically any rail or street crossing, you know, where those two meet, you could get funding for that. There's a slide that we have later that explains a little bit more of that program. So I'll wait and see if that slide answers the questions, and then if it doesn't, then we can revisit that. Okay, and then Chad Schaefer has commented that $1 million is not enough in your experience. Thanks, Chad. We'll take note of that. How do we get our input to you? How can we participate as a stakeholder? How do we tell if our bridge is off system? So how you can get your input to us is you can simply send an email. On one of those slides, we had our email addresses listed, but we can go back to that slide as well. Maybe we'll do that at the end on a way to get a hold of us. Also, if you Google Iowa DOT local systems, you can find our contact information on that website as well. How can you participate as a stakeholder? So we have a kind of small group of stakeholders, and the purpose of a smaller group is so we can have maybe a more meaningful discussion and not have, you know, the meeting last too long to get input from everyone. So we have APWA is who kind of elects the members to be on the stakeholder committee for IIJA. We are interested in hearing from all of you. But like I mentioned, in order to have a meeting that runs fairly smoothly, we wouldn't want, you know, a couple hundred people to be at the meeting. So that's where if you email us, we can definitely take that input into consideration and you know, tell those stakeholders from APWA things like, hey, we've been receiving emails from various cities and here's what they had to say. And then if, you know, you think a phone call is better, it's probably best to email us to kind of schedule a time for a phone call. We have a ridiculous amount of meetings here in local systems. So we can definitely set up a time to have discussions as well. And then I think we answered the off-system bridge question. Okay, Mike Barkalow, 1 million is not enough. Okay, thank you. Jesse Howe, the $1 million threshold is low for a lot of city bridges and adequate for some minor bridges. Thanks, Jesse. Is there a process for being part of the subsequent stakeholder meetings? And like I mentioned, you know, we can take input if you'd like to email or call us. We can definitely take your input, but we do like to keep those stakeholder meetings a little bit smaller. I didn't share a slide that I had in previous presentations, but our stakeholders from the APWA side of things, let me see if I can rattle them off the top of my head. Paul Wigand with the SUDAS and Public Works Service Bureau, Jeff May from the City of Clive, John Dostart from the City of Altoona, Jason Hovel from the City of Iowa City, Pam Cooksey from the City of Des Moines, and Dave Carney from the City of Sioux City, who is also the APWA president this year. Sarah says I'm good on my committee members, so. Okay, and then Sarah had put a helpful piece of information about the maps showing the roadway classification. So if you guys want to click that link, you can see that Sarah Okerlund typed that in just about a minute ago. Oh, and she also asked what number would you consider more reasonable for those that believe that the 1 million is not enough? So that's a great question to ask, and we would love to get your input on that. Does anyone else have any questions about the new IIJA bill before we transition into some of the existing funding programs? I don't see anyone's hand raised. I don't see anything else in the chat pod. So I think we will go ahead and continue. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Okerlund now. She'll discuss the funding programs in Iowa.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. So most of you are probably super familiar with this, but it's kind of a general slide we usually present ahead of these funding basic information. So from a local funding standpoint, you guys have your road use tax funds. If you see throughout this presentation, RUTF, it's road use tax fund. So we kind of use those interchangeably. You also have your LOST and TIF and GEO bonds, your general fund, those sorts of things that you're all super familiar with. We also have the state funding for transportation projects, and those are usually application-based. And I'm going to go through some of those here in a minute. And we also have the swap funding that Nicole mentioned, where we swap out what would have been federal aid with the primary road use tax funds that will kind of be evolving here in the near future. And then there's also the federal funding. Very little of that goes directly from the feds to the local agencies. There are some exceptions, build grants, raise grants, those types of things, but most of them are allocated through the Iowa DOT to go through to our local agencies. And then our local systems bureau is actually who help with that facilitating of the money when it goes pass through. And we have some oversight requirements with our stewardship and oversight agreement between Iowa DOT and Federal Highway to ensure we are able to get all of you that federal funding. In order for federal funds to work, they do have to be programmed in what we call our STIP, which is the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And that is managed by the Iowa DOT, the RPAs, and the MPOs. Usually federal funding requires a match and state funds can be used for that match. If you have questions, we've, a lot of these, I think if the presentations are shared with you, we should have hyperlinks in here. But the IM 1.000 gives some of our oversight of our local public agencies, which includes the cities and the counties. So I'm going to kind of go through some of the different fundings here. From a federal aid program standpoint, and all of these from here going forward, excuse me, are our existing programs. So these are programs that existed prior to this new IIJA. And so what Nicole was talking about are all of those potential changes, and we need to make sure that what we're doing meets the existing federal requirements with this new bill, and also expanding it for whatever the needs happen to be, which is part of that stakeholder conversation and discussion. So our STBG is our Surface Transportation Block Grants, and those are funds allocated to the RPAs and MPOs on those eligible routes. And again, those eligible routes, you can use that link in the chat to go to a map page that the Iowa DOT has set up. Go ahead and click on your county. Then there'll be several different types of map options, and you want federal functional classification is what you're looking for when we say on system or off system and eligible routes. We also have what we call our Highway Bridge Program, or HBP. We have both a county version of that and the city version of that. The City Bridge Program is what you guys are probably used to hearing that called. There's also the HSIP, which is our Highway Safety Improvement Program. And then our ICAP, which is, like Nicole mentioned, funded through that federal CMAQ program. Our TAP, and federal rec trails. So when it comes to our swap programs, the existing programs that we swap are programs that are allocated through the RPAs and MPOs. They have to have all federal aid eligible routes on these, which means all farm to market systems, which is more of a county thing. And then we don't allow any local routes for these STBG funds. Bridges can be, however, on any route. They don't have to be on those eligible routes, and that would make it an off-system bridge from all the technical terminology. With our SWAP program for the STBG, we actually limited it, like we took off the requirements since it's state operated and we didn't have to follow those federal rules. And we made it 100% funding with no match required, with kind of a focus on helping with the construction end of things. And that helps on our end from an administration standpoint as well. And then we have the County Bridge Program that is swapped currently. Again, 100% construction without match required. And then we have the City Bridge Program. Again, 100% construction currently with no match required. And that is up to $1 million cap existing in the program. HSIP is the same as before. No changes in those requirements. It just is state money instead of federal money. So you don't have the Davis-Bacon and that sort of thing. And then we have some ICAP projects that can be swapped. Some of them cannot, depends what the scope of the project is. It has to meet the requirements of our primary road use tax funds in order to be eligible, which is why TAP is not a swap eligible program. So, and then we have our state programs. There's a lot of different programs through the DOT. And in December of 21, we actually updated our online guide for our federal, like for our transportation programs available to all of you. So if you wanted to just Google this, just Iowa DOT funding guide, it's going to bring it right up for you. But there's also the website and a link to it. There's a few examples and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to kind of go through them. What time is it here? I'm going to try to go through them really fast, more not to tell you all the nitty-gritty details of these programs, but to remind you that they are out there. in case you happen to have a need that you might be able to utilize some of these programs for. And then I would recommend going to these websites and getting more information from there. We don't actually administer all of these, but somewhere within the DOT we do. So RISE is Revitalize Iowa's Sound Economy. And these are really to promote economic development via roadway construction. So they are application-based. Some of them don't have a deadline, others do have a deadline. So there's the website to go look for those. Really, I think the key to a lot of these is if you have new economic development and it's gonna bring in jobs into your community, you might as well look for this to access that development. Highway Railroad Crossing Safety Program. This one is, again, a program that we have. It is application driven with a deadline of July 1. I do not know all of the nitty gritty details for this. I think that was one of the questions before, is any city street eligible? And I believe it is, but I don't know for sure on that. But there is some information here, and it would have contact information in there on someone who would know the details of that. If you still can't find it in there, reach out to one of us and we'll get you in touch with someone. Always happy to do that. And then we have the Highway Railroad Crossing Surface Repair Fund. This one is not funded at a huge level. It's more state funded from a road use tax basis. There is no deadline for applications. However, there is a pretty long backlogs of 3 or 4 years. So if you have a railroad crossing in your community, don't wait until it's completely deteriorated to apply for this program. Get your name in the hat early so you have a little bit of time for that. And again, there's application-based and there's details in that guide or in this presentation. We have ICAP, and this is more of our clean air attainment program. So, and just to kind of let you know, there is a deadline on this as well. It's October 1. There's contact information in that. And really the key to this, I think the cities probably use it a lot from a congestion standpoint. How do we get traffic moving more efficiently without just sitting and idling? So, and then we have our city bridge program. Like I said, that's sometimes referred to as HBP. And our current bridge program is swap eligible. A couple of the MPOs here in the state do not participate in that swap. So some of them are still federal aid. And we also have a $500,000 annual state city bridge program. And those come off the top of the road use tax fund. Those are to replace and rehab bridges in poor conditions. So this IM 1.100 has all of the information in regards to our city bridge program. We have a candidate list. Once you're on the list, you're on the list, and we leave you on there until you no longer qualify, sort of a thing, where like a bridge that's been closed more than 10 years would not qualify. If you want to be added to that candidate list, if you have a bridge in your community that is in poor condition, please reach out to Jennifer Bates, our new urban engineer, and she can get you on that list for consideration next year. We do have an October 1 deadline, so we're looking at those projects for consideration actually right now that met the deadline for last year. So we do have an online list available of the last year award winners and candidates as well. So. Then we have our STBG swap program. There's about $80 million available annually, and those do go through the MPOs and RPAs, like I said. And the qualifications for those and application process vary depending on the RPA and MPO. So reach out to your RPA and MPO to get more information on that. These projects do need to be let through the Iowa DOT. We also have a USTEP and CSTEP program. These are for primary roadway extensions. So DOT roads going through our cities and counties. So for a city, if you have a highway going through and your community and you're looking at doing a linear or spot improvement, there's the information, and you can get up to $200,000 for a spot improvement and up to $400,000 for a linear improvement. Say you've got an adjacent project, you'd like to kind of upgrade an intersection at the same time, or would look at overlaying or widening a roadway or something like that. So you would reach out to your district engineer for these types of projects. And then we've got a pedestrian curb ramp construction project. This also you would reach out to your district engineer, and it is for primary roadway extensions through your city. So the highway that goes through your town, if you've got a project butting up to it, it can be the eligible ramps in the DOT right-of-way that you are upgrading with that project, or it can be a standalone project. We also have a TEAP program, Traffic Engineering Assistant Program. And this is really designed to help our counties and cities who are not big enough to have their own city engineer and have that transportation, or that traffic engineering resource right there in their office. And it will provide up to $100 or 100 hours of consultant time on a safety issue that you have in your community. Sometimes what that means is the consultant will ask the city to provide information and data and maybe do some traffic counts or some turning movement counts or something for them so they can make better use of their 100 hours. So there, in order to work on this one, you also do a letter to your district engineer. We also have the TSIP program, which is Traffic Safety Improvement Program. This is through our Traffic and Safety Bureau here at the DOT. It is, again, an application process with a deadline of August 15th. And this is for traffic safety improvements and studies. And there's 3 different categories for these projects. Those site-specific, traffic control devices, and studies and outreach. More information on the website. We have federal and state rec trail programs. Again, application-based with deadlines. 2 different deadlines for the different programs. There's a federal one and a state program with different match requirements associated with each. Again, more information online. And our TAP program, which is that Transportation Alternative Program. And again, it's another application-based process and statewide, and it can kind of vary from community to community. So depending which MPO and RPA and stuff you are in for some of that. A few other programs that are out there included in that funding guide that I talked about right at the beginning. We have Railroad Revolving Loan and Grant Program. We have Linking Iowa's Freight Transportation System, or the LIFTS program. We have the Railroad Rehab and Improvement Program. A lot of these are kind of more focused on economic development and that sort of thing, and improving that across the state. We have a federal lands access program. So if you have a federal park or cemetery or something in your community, this would be something worth looking at to access that park. There's DNR, DOT funds, Living Roadway Trust Fund, kind of beautification in your right-of-way type things. Federal Airport Improvement Program and State Airport Improvement Program. Again, we recommend going to these websites for more information on those. And I won't talk too much. You guys know, I'm sure you know all about road use tax funds and how they're distributed. And I'm going to turn this over to Mary Beth to kind of do a little bit of a quick discussion of street finance report.
Hello, everybody. Really happy to see a bunch of names that I recognized as you were all popping into class today. I am really short compared to the other 2 people doing this presentation. So anyway, I just want to hit a couple highlights on street finance report. I believe a lot of you have already been to class with me, so I'm not going to make this very long. And if you have further questions about them, feel free to email me or give me a call. I hear from a lot of you on a fairly regular basis, which I really enjoy. We made a big change and did a complete revision of the report that launched last year. So there's been 2 seasons of the new report at this point, and I think it's going pretty well, down to kind of doing some minor tweaking. Don't really anticipate changing a lot for this next season, other than maybe making a few things flow just a little more smoothly than they have been. So that was a big change. Made that change so that it lined up more with the chart of accounts, general city accounting, the AFR, the budget. Hopefully everybody likes that. It should be easier for all of you. So that's big and different. Similar to the AFR, shouldn't be as hard for you to do as the version that we had before that. Because of changes to that report, you are now able to post revenue to the road use fund. I know that was kind of a big no-no before. You couldn't take money that came in. The example that I usually use is interest on a CD. If you have road use funds in a CD and you're receiving interest on those funds. Previously, we always told you that you had to put that in the general fund and couldn't actually post that back to the road use fund. And now on the new report, it allows you to do that. So we can allow you to do that. So you want to keep that money with the CD that originally created it, because a lot of the times the banks are going to automatically try to roll that into your CD balance anyway. So now you can do that. If you want to post any revenue to the road use fund, that is okay. Just don't use the same chart of account lines as you have for the state fund, that check or that EFT that shows up 12 times a year for you. You can do transfers into the road use fund or out of the road use fund. I do have some cities that have already started doing all of their street and road expenses in the road use fund. And if they need more dollars than what they get from road use tax, they are just making their transfer from typically general fund or local option into the road use fund so that they have it all in one place. If you want to do that, you absolutely can. If you want to make a transfer from the road use fund to capital projects so that you can do your capital project all in one place, that is also absolutely fine. So those are big changes that came from the new report version. The new changes that happened this past year is the new reporting due date. It was due December 1st. I'm sure everybody that's in this session today has theirs turned in, I hope. If not, you better get off this session and go finish it for me. So it's now due December 1st and will be December 1st going forward. We will release the report the same as always, right after the 4th of July break. Trainings will be offered, usually starting with the Clerks Academy at the end of July, try to do one there. And then throughout August and September, both in person and online. And I'll do the online ones all the way into the beginning of November for those of you who have put it off to the last minute. And there's also videos always online that you can get to too. So other changes, you don't have to have the SFR approved by your council anymore. You do need to present it at a council meeting. I would put it on your agenda, make sure that it shows up in the minutes, that the council received a copy of the street finance report. But the reality is that all of that data was already approved during the year, either through a revenue that came in on your treasurer's report or an expense on your claims list. So you're just doing a summary of that on the street finance report, and there's nothing council really can change on that, just like the AFR. So it needs to be presented so they see it, but it doesn't need to be approved, and you can just go ahead and turn it in. You can turn it in upon completion. You don't have to have it go through council and get them see it first before you turn it in. So hopefully that makes things a little easier for all of you and speeds it up a little bit. So we're going to talk just a quick minute about why this report is important to you. I know that having several reports due on the same day is not much fun. And quite honestly, none of the reports that we do as cities are much fun, but we do them for a reason. One, there is a federal report that sits above this, and I take all of your data plus all the county data and turn it into them, and it's required, so we have to do it. But two, we have several groups that take the data out of the street finance report and use it for various things. That makes possibilities for grants. It goes to the MPOs and the RPAs, and they use it for forecasting, and they turn it into their reports. And there's also another group that's looking at it and trying to evaluate if there are any other sources where we could generate more funds for streets and roads so that you have more resources to be able to do more construction, more repair, more maintenance than what you have right now. So it's really important to get good data on this. The more details you can give me, the better it is. The more accurate, obviously, hopefully it is. So this report kind of is growing in importance now that we have some more details in it. So I really appreciate the time that everybody puts into doing this report for me every year. That's really all I have, because a lot of you I do see at my training sessions. So if you need anything more about street finance report, feel free to send me email, give me a call, and we will talk about it. Still open to suggestions. There are some things I really can't change on that report because of the federal requirements. But if there's something you think would make it go more smoothly, let me know. I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah. and let her finish us up.
Hello, everyone. So I don't know if Nicole mentioned it at the beginning, but thanks for your patience as we're kind of working around in an office, the place we were going, the room we were going to present in initially. Actually, we're having construction in the building, and so it's very loud in there, and we didn't think you guys would appreciate that. So I'm just going to go in kind of quick here at the end and give you a few additional Local Systems Bureau resources. Some of the things we've talked about today. Nicole mentioned, I think, updates from, new federal information as they come through, maybe construction update type stuff as it comes through, specification changes, and even job postings and job opportunities that are relevant to our transportation partners. We have all of that stuff. We send it through a system called Gov Delivery. You are welcome to go on our website. On the side there, you can see where it says Local Systems Emails. Click on that. It'll bring up a subscribe page. If you subscribe to multiple of these and we send it to multiple, you'll still only get one email. You can always unsubscribe at any time as well. So if you don't like the emails you're getting, you can do that too. But this is kind of our primary way of reaching out to everyone as our DOT local system. So I would encourage you to sign up if you're not already signed up. And the other thing that we provide from a guidance standpoint that might be useful to you, or at least good for you to know is our IMs, Instructional Memorandums is what that stands for. And we have them on our website. You can see to the left here is a picture of like the table of contents, and everything is hyperlinked in there to the different IMs. We also have a federal aid guide, a non-federal aid guide, project development oversight information, construction project oversight information. And we're always here to answer questions if you do have questions about any of that stuff. So you're welcome to reach out to any of us in local systems. We also have some pre-letting resources. So if you have a project in development, looking for maybe like the targeted small business information and other DOT forms, we have post-letting resources. So after it's been let and you're looking at a construction project, forms, claim reimbursements, information on what we call our e-construction stuff, which is APIA and Doc Express, trying to make our paper files electronic in a sense, in essence. We have bridge information, we have county and city report information, we have bid threshold information, and then lots of trainings. So I'll kind of go through a little bit more of that. Here you can see just kind of a snip of our city reports page on the website, and it has some Time 21 information. It has kind of an estimate on a DOT per capita forecast for that road use tax fund distribution, just that sort of a thing. I think there's also some 2020 census information on there that we've tried to put together. So we also have the bid and quote threshold information. So that's there along with some guidance. If maybe you're working with a council and they don't understand, the links are here and you can at least provide that information to them, kind of where things are in the code and that sort of a thing. And that I think is one of our purposes as local systems, as well as to help you be aware of where those things are when you do have to try to defend something that maybe your council or a citizen is not happy about. So we can at least provide the information for you so you have that as a source and document on why you're doing what you're doing or not doing what they want you to do. We also have a lot of training opportunities. So we work with our local LTAP, which is the Local Transportation Assistance Program, I believe is what it stands for. And we have lots of different training opportunities for them, accessible sidewalks, ADA type stuff, roadway safety conferences, and different workshops. You can also Google the Iowa LTAP and you'll find a lot of information there. We also do regional spring meetings. And if you've never attended one of these, I would encourage that. In 2020, they were canceled, but we recorded them and put them on our website. In 2021, we did 4 live virtual websites, and we were able to also get those recorded and uploaded. And then this year, we're gonna try to go live with everything. And so we have 3 in person, 1 in each of our regions. And the dates are there, the February 24th, 25th, and then in March for the West, Central, and East region. We're hoping to get those. I don't know, we're gonna try to record them to make them available, but I can't make any promises just because of the facilities that we're working in, and we're not positive if it will work. So we don't wanna overpromise. We also have federal aid overview training, federal aid swap overview training on there with links. A lot of like PowerPoint presentations, kind of like this when we were doing some training. The street finance report training is on there, and other things like that. And then from an administrative standpoint and other things that we do in local systems, there's a slew of stuff that we do. I'll just kind of leave that up there. And at this point, ask if there are any questions for any of us.
While we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I will just mention that this resource will be made available online. I know there was a lot of questions about that and sending it out, but if we don't have any questions come in, I just want to thank all of you. And Nicole, Mary Beth, and Sarah, thank you so much for being here. You've been incredibly generous with your time. This has been a great presentation, very well attended. We can see from these initial attendance numbers just how much interest there was in this subject matter. So we look forward to providing this outward and working with you as additional questions come up. And I'm just doing one more look here. I'm not seeing additional questions. Just chime in if I've mentioned something or missed something, excuse me. And otherwise, thank you to everybody for being here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to host this webinar and have us online with you. We really appreciate the ability to share information that we think might be of value to you folks.
And your feedback too. We appreciate that, so thank you.
I got one quick question in, real quick. Their Highway 15 is their main street, and they have an opportunity to do a parking area along the highway at our cost. Is there any grants for that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I am aware of either. That doesn't mean there's not.
I guess I would say maybe there might be some grant opportunities through other funding mechanisms, like other departments, not through the DOT. Sometimes they have, you know, community development type grants. I'm fairly unfamiliar with all of these things besides our DOT funding. I wonder who you could reach out to. Would RPAs or MPOs maybe be aware of some of those different funding opportunities?
They might be. That might be a really good place to start, is your RPA or MPO. Another place to ask might be Iowa Economic Development. They might be able to provide some information on that. Because I would assume it's probably just support business parking.
Sure.
Yeah. But
fantastic. Well, thank you all again for joining us, and thank you for presenting. We will hopefully do this again sometime and be able to kind of keep the conversation going. If you do have additional questions, there have been some resources provided. We're going to send those out as well. Feel free to email myself or Jess, and we'll try and get those questions forwarded on. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.